This is the podcast for women who want to create careers and lives they love. I'm your host, Heather Fincher. Welcome to the Powerful Professional Women podcast. I'm delighted to have Gloria Larson here again today for part 2 in front of a live audience to share her experience and insight into creating a career in life you love. Gloria is a Boston business leader, respected lawyer, and public policy expert, and for over a decade, she served as the first female president of Bentley University. A recipient of numerous awards and honors, Gloria has served as a director on multiple public company boards and in top leadership positions with the Federal Trade Commission, the Massachusetts governor, and as partner with the law firm Foley Hoag as co-chair of the Government Strategies Group. While at Bentley, Gloria launched the Center for Women and Business, which the board has since renamed in her honor, the Gloria Larson Center for Women in Business. Welcome, Gloria. I'm so grateful to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much for including me. I'm thrilled with what you're doing with these podcasts. It couldn't be coming at a more important time when we think about how much difficulty women had during COVID with all balancing on the balancing, doing everything they needed to do. And now many of them re-entering the workplace, some now returning to the workplace directly from working at home. These are difficult times across the board. And we know from McKinsey that a lot of women did drop out during COVID. Most have returned to the workplace, but we're still facing a lot of the same challenges and obstacles that we've long faced. Progress has been made, but I'm hopeful through your podcast that women continue to see the possibilities that come from self-empowerment, just learning some of the lessons from those of us who've already gone through the school of hard knocks for many decades and made lots of mistakes and can share the lessons we've learned.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you as well. And I mean, our last episode, I was so inspired, and I'm grateful you were willing to share some of the mistakes you've made, the ways you've learned and grown from them, the actionable insights that you've shared on optimism. Just really appreciate your willingness to just be authentic and help us learn from your experiences, like you just said. So diving into this part 2, what are a couple of areas you see as critically important for women when creating our careers, Gloria?
Well, the first one is to seize opportunities that mean the most to you. I think we hear over and over again, only do what you're passionate about. It's been maybe overstated so many times that it almost sounds trite, but I do think that finding meaning in what you do. We think a lot now, thankfully, about the purpose-driven organization having an essential core purpose. Well, I think that's true for us personally. What is your core purpose in your career? What are you trying to achieve? Not simply for yourself, but for your organization and for others, for other stakeholders. And I think that when you do that, when you actually figure out what drives your own personal passion, what gives you a reason to get up every morning and go to work, even when there are challenges that lie ahead, which there always are, and that you can rely on your greatest capabilities, on the skills you've developed, the learnings that you've had along the way. That when you pull all of that together, you're doing things that provide that meaning that you're actually looking for beyond what you're doing outside of work, but in work too. When you do that, a woman who famously became the first woman to head the Washington Post enterprise, Katharine Graham, she said, to find meaning in your work, what could be more important? Because it can turn a job into something that is so meaningful for you that it can really become your purpose. It's your calling. You can find your calling. I found that so powerful. I heard that many decades ago, and I thought, when I don't find that calling any longer, and that can happen to you in a career, you find that you lose the passion for what you're doing. I've always tried to make a change. Sometimes it's a change within the organization. I've asked for, hey, could I be moved over into a different position in this organization to test my skills there? And to grow and learn more and do more effectively for the enterprise. At the same time, be unafraid about, sort of also rethinking your career path. We don't all have to be engineers in terms of linear thinking. Everything is not a ladder. It can be a lattice. It can be a jungle gym, a multifaceted jungle gym, where sometimes you go sideways in your career. You may take a step down. I have purposely taken a step down in some cases, certainly compensation-wise, in order to learn new things and move forward in ways that I knew would be more productive. And also, of course, you can also move up. I think it's that combination of being willing to take some risks and to seize opportunities that allow you to continue to grow and to give back to whatever organization you're associated with, that will allow you through many decades of a career to maintain that essential self confidence in who you are as an executive, who you are as someone who wants to continue to grow and thrive and do the best job you possibly can.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love what you're saying too. Just accept that sometimes a role or a job is maybe even your calling for a time, but you don't have to force yourself to stay there. If there's a shift or if there's a flow, or if you want to learn more, like you said, make a move up or down in the hierarchy of things, right? But just to learn and grow and become more of the person you want to be, that's great. And give ourselves.
That's exactly right. Just the way you said is exactly right. And there's another element that attaches to finding this purpose. We don't go it alone in our careers, or we shouldn't. I think it's incredibly important to remember that mentors and sponsors and having a big network, one that you grow throughout your career, both inside the office and outside, can be through volunteer work. I mean, networks can be built very broadly. These are essential to a successful career. I think we didn't really recognize this quite as much as we should have maybe 30, 40 years ago, but it really matters in terms of learning from others to pick somebody out who should be, you feel like, boy, that's who I'd like to grow up to be in this office. And also sponsors matter. We didn't know at the time, but people who actually help you, who can see your capabilities and could say, you know what, you deserve a promotion and I'm in a position in this organization to help you gain it, to be an advocate for you in your career. That's the difference between a mentor who can provide counseling and advice and a sponsor who can actually aid you in the next successful step. I had both a mentor and a sponsor in my early 30s at the Federal Trade Commission, and it changed everything for me. She was one of maybe just a handful of federally appointed, presidentially appointed, Senate-confirmed women in all of Washington in the early 1980s. This was at the Federal Trade Commission. There were 5 commissioners, and she was the only woman for part of the time I was there. And then there were only 2 women along the way. But she was well known across the city because she also cared for bringing young women in as counsels to her. I was one of the 3 attorney advisors who advised her in her role. And 2 of the 3 of us were women. And she cared a lot about changing the bias structure that existed in all organizations, including the federal government at the time for women, that there was this strong subliminal and sometimes overt gender bias, as well as other biases. But she also modeled being the person that you hope to become. She had such a strong moral compass. She always believed in doing the right thing, even when it hindered her own success in her own position. Even where she was called out. We were in a dissenting role during the Reagan administration. We were the ones having to dissent from various decisions. She did it proudly. She didn't hide from it. And here's what's interesting. She was a Republican who was dissenting in a Republican administration. That's incredibly powerful. It was a lesson. I had not until that point been very politically involved. Later, when I joined Governor Wells' cabinet here back in Massachusetts, I knew how powerful it was to simply take a position that you believe in, to always do that right thing. So Pat Bailey embodied every single thing that I wanted to be. And here's the best part. This was the 1980s. Women were few and far between as role models. I didn't believe any longer there was a glass ceiling because she had already broken through in her own career. So I believe genuinely, with my sense of overriding optimism, that there was always going to be an opportunity, as tough as the road might be because of bias and other factors, that there was always going to be an opportunity to make a breakthrough at some point. And I held tight to that. What's great about Pat Bailey is that she remained a true friend to me throughout my career. And she did introduce me to a different administration, to the Bush administration in the late 1980s. In a senior position where I was in an appointed role myself with 500 young attorneys who reported to me. That would not have happened had she not sponsored me from her prior role as my boss at the Federal Trade Commission. I was already in Boston practicing law at the time when I was called back to Washington to take this senior position. That's real sponsorship. We just didn't know to call it at the time. And then fast forward 20, 25 years later, when I was appointed president of Bentley University, she attended my inauguration. A powerful moment that she would travel from her retirement in Santa Fe, New Mexico to be there. And you can imagine, I referenced her in my inaugural speech because it's the impact that mentors and sponsors have building that network that can be career changing and in some cases even life changing in terms of their impact on you.
You're absolutely right. That's so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing and giving us that example for you. And it's so true. The relationships just are solid and can stay for years and years and years. So,
and don't be afraid to ask. If you see someone, I applied for the job to work for her after she'd already been in the role 2 years because I so wanted to work for her. And, I summoned the court confidence to apply for a job that I felt kind of young at that point. I'd only been at the FTC 2 years. I was a little worried that I wasn't senior enough. And fortunately, she saw something in me potential-wise that she wanted to be the one to share that growth opportunity. But be bold. Ask someone to have lunch with you just as a mentor, somebody who could, offer you some advice. Say, I've admired you from afar. Would you have lunch with me or breakfast with coffee with me and just share a few insights? And similarly, if you see someone who knows your work, someone you've been working with, you could say, hey, could you help me figure out and think through some of my next moves in this organization because I want to stay and learn here. I don't want to go someplace else.
Right. Gloria, imagine if your younger self were coming to you now, what would you say? What advice would you give her?
Oh gosh, this comes so quickly to me. It would be, have confidence in yourself. It's so ironic to be optimistic, positive about, doing things the right way in the workplace, be optimistic about the future, but have that little imposter voice that so many women still struggle from inside you that says, but are you ready for this? Maybe you shouldn't apply for this. Maybe you shouldn't offer your opinion in that meeting. What do you know about this? And is it really going to be relevant to the discussion? Gosh, I struggled that whole first 10 years of my career, and Pat Bailey made an incredible difference in changing that dynamic for me, of offering my opinions even in a small group. It was hard to say, is this important enough for me to share? Well, I learned to get over that, but it took many years to get over sort of the imposter voice that most often raises itself when you think you're ready to take that next big leap in your career. And then it's like, the second guessing that goes on. Am I really prepared for this? Well, one thing that I hope people hold on to is that I know it's been true. I've seen many surveys of this, even in the last decade, that men most often get promoted based on their potential. And still, too many women get promoted on demonstrated performance. If that unconscious bias still underlies some promotion decisions, here's what this compels you to do. It compels you to offer your opinions. Think about it. Even if you have to write down some notes the night before, knowing you're going to have an important meeting with a group of people, because I promise you, if you don't say what you think's important, some guy or some other person 2 feet over from you is going to say exactly the same thing, and you've lost that opportunity. Similarly, with promotions that you've earned, things that you deserve, you really need to raise your hand in a performance review and say, you know what, it would be just great if I could be considered for this X opportunity. The worst thing that can happen is they say you're not quite ready for it. But the best thing that can happen, and will very often happen, is, I didn't know you'd be interested. That's when the voice, you should start quelling that voice inside when someone tells you, you know what, didn't think you were interested in this promotion. Otherwise, I would have thought of you and you would have been in the pool. So don't ever build that confidence that allows you to take that next step forward, whatever it is that demonstrates what you can do. I love this quote that I saw many decades ago, which is, your good work may be noticed without your saying anything. That can happen. It almost never does. It takes you being a diplomatic advocate for yourself. Mention your achievements. It can be hard to do. I know. As a Southern girl, I grew up learning to apologize too many times for everything, and also to not heap praise on anything I was doing, to praise others. but not to say that I'd done a good job. And I've had to overcome that my entire career. But along the way, I did learn some valuable lessons. And one incident in particular really was this galvanizing moment for me where I learned I would never again allow the imposter voice to take over when opportunity presented itself. I was then working for Governor William Weld in Massachusetts, and I was already in his cabinet. I was Secretary of Consumer Affairs and Business Regulation. It was a great job. I loved everything I was doing. It fit perfectly with my Federal Trade Commission, consumer and antitrust-based experience and working with companies. And this was state regulatory matters, not federal regulatory matters. So it was a perfect learning opportunity. But 2.5 years in, I really wanted to change. The governor called me into his office and he said, news that was still confidential, the Secretary of Economic Affairs, a far more wide-ranging opportunity, had opened up because the incumbent was leaving. And did I know anyone who would be particularly well qualified for the role? This was my dream job, Heather. I so wanted to be the Secretary of Economic Affairs. It would be, like raising all boats. I could go on the trade missions that with other businesses that Governor Weld and Governor Cellucci were doing. It would be an opportunity to reduce cost structures and barriers to doing business in expensive Massachusetts. We could build new industry sectors like biotech and infuse new power into various parts of the economy by doing the things that government can do through the right policies. I wanted that job. Instead, here's what I told Governor Weld. I said, I can think of 3 or 4 people who would be phenomenal candidates for this job. I went through their resumes and I said, you would have, one of the best people you could possibly find to do, follow in the shoes of the successful incumbent. And I think you've got a great group to choose from. And he literally lowered his glasses. He looked at me and he said, Gloria Larson, I called you in here because I thought you might be the ideal candidate, given your consumer affairs and business experience here the last 2 to 3 years for this position. And now I'm pretty sure you're not, because you didn't mention yourself. So you must have reservations about your ability to do the job. Well, at that moment, I felt like I was 2 inches high, felt a little bit like Eloise perched on Governor Weld is 6'4", and he's sitting on behind this huge desk in his office. I've never been so nervous. And I perched at the edge of this chair. And I said, Governor, would you give me 5 more minutes? And he said, yeah, sure, go for it. And I said, I would like you to consider me. Please consider me for these reasons. And I reached deep and I pulled out what I'd actually in my head practiced 1,000 times, the reasons why I thought I might be able to do this. And he looked at me and he said, I was pretty unsure that you lacked not just the confidence, but maybe even the ability if you didn't believe you had the right stuff for this. He said, now I think I was right in the first place. And ultimately, he gave me that job. And it was one of the single most rewarding jobs I've ever held, possibly next to the Bentley University presidency. But that's the silver lining of this story. I swore to myself I would never allow this to happen again. So when the unexpected happened, a number of years later, 10 years later, I've been a partner at Foley Hoag in Boston, loved my law firm, but was starting to repeat cases and things and starting to get that sort of feeling like, wonder if this is going to be all there is. I think I have one more big opportunity left in. Out of the blue, serendipitously, I got a call from 2 trustees from Bentley University, and they said, we're recruiting academics for this post. Our presidency will be open this following year. And we'd like to also interview a few unorthodox candidates. I had just finished building the convention center. I was a member of the Chamber of Commerce Board of Directors and knew the business community quite well from the Weld administration, as well as my law practice. And they said, we think you might be a good candidate. Heather, I jumped at the opportunity. I knew nothing about Bentley University. It's a B school. It's a business school, a very well-known business school, but not one that I had any direct familiarity with. And I thought later, I remember getting home and saying to my husband, what the heck made me think that I should say yes? But he reminded me, what you said yes to is an introductory conversation. And that conversation beget another conversation and a third and a fourth. And over the course of 9 months, I studied everything possible about Bentley, its past, its current strategy. I grew to love the school. Behind the scenes, everybody had signed non-disclosure documents. So I had these great interviews with a whole cast of people, some of whom on the faculty side were pretty unsure that they didn't want someone who didn't have an academic background. In fact, my very last interview involved me sitting at a very long table where the guy who convened the meeting was one of the chief leaders in the academic side of the house. And he looked at me and he said, Gloria Larson, when we started this interview process, we had only one inviolate rule about the next president. They must be a world-class academic. And I thought, that I am not. And so I sort of pretended, I thought, well, there are 20 people around this table, and some are students and some are academics and some are administrators and there are a few trustees. And I think he's trying to test me, but I don't know. So I started to pack up my things and I said, I think that if that's true, then I'm clearly not your candidate. But maybe there's some things we could talk about and I could change your mind. And he said, we decided before this meeting, the academics who are involved in this search process decided that we would at least give you a chance for an interview. And I had that full scale interview for the better part of, a couple of hours. And at the end of the day, a month later, I was offered the position. And it's the single most rewarding position in a very long career of, government work, legal work, and ultimately heading an academic institution that was, in terms of the industry sector, sort of maybe way above my pay grade, but it just was incredibly rewarding. And I think what was most rewarding was that I'd already fallen in love with millennials, the generation that I was working with at Foley Hoag. And those were our students. And beyond the faculty that I grew to love and respect, the administrators, the trustees, the whole Bentley family, the community that I grew to love, it was the students who inspired me every single day, because it was the first time I met a generation who believed exactly what I believe, that business isn't all about profits. It's about people and our planet at the same time. That when you look through the prism of multiple stakeholders, which, by the way, is common wisdom today, but was not when I started at most schools, and in the business community was not universally the mantra. This was in 2007 when I first started at Bentley. At any rate, Bentley was one of the very first schools to adopt triple bottom line thinking. And that triple bottom line thinking of people, planet, profit was what we were already teaching at Bentley. That's what made me, along with the millennials, fall in love with this and think, you know what? I bet I could do that job. Now, when I got the job, Heather, very shortly into the job, my husband and I were driving down to a football game. And I remember distinctly turning to him in the car and saying, do you believe they gave me this job? I'm not qualified to do this. I don't have anything. This is at a point in my career when I'd already, achieved most of what I wanted to achieve, but I had changed sectors. I was doing something completely different than any of the things I'd done before. My husband quietly looked at me, as he always did, and he said, you've done this before. You jump into the deep end of the pool. You know how to tread water. You can swim and you can tread water. You know very well, because you've done it before, how to ask others for help, which I think is another thing that is a lesson learned. It's great to ask others who are already experienced in their roles. That's part of finding good mentors. It's part of finding good sponsors, but it's also being optimistic. Part of seizing the opportunity is that you're willing to ask others and say, I don't know nearly enough about what I'm doing, and I have a lot to learn from you. And can you help me? Can you help me achieve this? So he reminded me, he took that little imposter voice, he vanquished it again. And only occasionally did it arise when the chips were down and I kind of questioned, my leadership at various points, which I think happens to all of us. But those are the things that I've sort of learned along the way. This goes back to your very first question about that led me to say confidence. To me, women often, we do a good job of on the outside appearing confident, but when it comes to really acknowledging our own capabilities, really advocating for ourselves, we're not very good at it. And many times that's because the little voice is saying it's inappropriate or, gee, maybe I don't know as much as I think I do. And we do need to consistently quiet that voice and understand that we are fully prepared to take that next step. That we've already demonstrated that over and over again in our careers. And literally from day one, you come from college and often graduate school prepared to take that initial step. Remind yourself of that. I'm absolutely as well prepared as anybody else who's in that same set of circumstances. And I find that that's been enormously helpful to me along the way.
Not only that you're prepared, but I also hear you saying, coming with, I am who I am, I'm prepared as I am, and I can learn what there is to learn.
Yes.
So
learning, lifelong learning is critically important, and acknowledging that. I can't tell you how often people have jumped in to help me, including at Bentley, both internally, where I turned to great faculty and others to help me thrive inside. I also had another mentor who was Susan Hockfield. She was currently at that point, while I was president at Bentley, she was the president at MIT. And I so admired her. I knew her a little bit through a women's organization that I was part of. And I boldly contacted her and I said, would you have breakfast with me? I think I need to learn from you. She said, absolutely. I went over to her house at MIT. We had several breakfasts. And every time I explained a problem I was having, not only did she have a good set of advice, opportunity, things for me to think about from an advisory perspective, but she also said in every case, I faced that too. That was incredibly empowering and confidence building. If Susan Hockfield had to face down her own challenges and those own internal fears that she experienced, and could then give me advice about overcoming both the challenges and how to quiet those inside fears, then I was learning from the best. And I could then pass that on to others, the paying it forward. She was enormously effective in paying it forward with my presidency. And I tried to do exactly the same with other presidents who are just assuming their roles. In fact, that's another thing for women to think about. Whatever you do in the corporate world, whatever you do in the startup world, whatever you do in NGOs, what you're doing in government and the academy, think hard about having an external. You can have an internal cabinet too, but these are often, once you get to the top, these are lonely positions. And you can't really seek advice on sensitive topics from the people right around you, including your own cabinet. I always had a kitchen cabinet from the time that I was at Foley Hoag to later. And what I found was, and certainly at Bentley, Susan Hockfield and others, it's been enormously powerful, even now in sort of semi-retirement, where I'm having a particular issue with something I'm doing. Could be volunteer work, could be one of the company boards I serve on. I like to ask others who are professionals and have been in somewhat similar positions what their advice. Just getting an independent view can be so powerful. And I love the fact that they call on me. I recently got a phone call saying, help, I need help. I'm negotiating another phase in my contract, and I know you went through exactly the same thing in similar circumstances. These are moments where we can share with each other and remind ourselves that we're absolutely not alone.
Yes. A kitchen cabinet, as you call it. I also have a group of women that I can go to, and it's been invaluable in my life professionally and personally, just to be able to go and talk and share. Gloria, to wrap things up, I'd love to hear, what are your 3 keys to success?
Oh boy. I feel like I'm going back to where I started because it's seriously, it's the 3 things that have been truly the success that started with Nancy Drew probably and Atticus Finch. It is all about optimism. It's about optimism. It's seeing the possibility, directly being clear-eyed, seeing what's happening around you, using data, resolve problems, using every bit of evidence and skill sets that you have, working with others, but be clear-eyed also about the opportunity to move things forward. And it's bring that positive attitude, that equilibrium that's often missing in the workplace. Workplace cultures are built around individual personalities. It's toned at the top for sure, and that it's wonderful when that's the kind of leadership that believes in empathy, that believes that everyone matters in the company. But that also matters with middle managers. That matters at every level in a company. So empathy will go a long way. And at the end of the day, believe in yourself. Promise me that you'll summon that inner confidence that you have, even if it's buried down below. Vanquish the imposter, the little guy inside, that little voice, and believe in yourself. It's really important because what you see in yourself, I guarantee ultimately others will see in you too.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for being on the podcast. I am personally grateful for you so courageously sharing everything that you have, and it's so valuable today. Thank you.
I was thrilled to join you.
I also want to thank our live audience who have been with Gloria and me today for all of your support and positive energy. And I'm grateful for each of our listeners. I hope you leave this episode inspired and empowered. Let's get out there and create careers and lives we love.